Good morning, everyone. Today is March 17th, 2025. It's St. Patrick's Day. Hope you're all wearing green if that's your thing. And I am Alice Morrison, and the co-executive director of Friends of Family Farmers, and I'm in charge of our policy program. So I'm here to talk you through updates from the legislature in the last week. These are our weekly briefings for the state legislative session here in Oregon. And today we are going to be covering 4 topics. So we're going to give a little update on where we are in the FOF priority areas. We're going to talk about some hearings that happened last week, some hearings that are happening this week, and then talk about where we are in the legislative calendar, because we're approaching some deadlines that are pretty important and will determine, what types of not necessarily what types, but what specific policies we'll be working on in the second half of the session after these upcoming deadlines. All right, so FOF priority updates. So our first bill of priority or issue area of priority is the state meat inspection program. We were responsible for crafting HB 2164 with our legislative champions in the House Ag Committee. That bill is still passed out of its first committee. It is still in Ways and Means because it is appropriating general funds for FTE for staffing rather for the Department of Agriculture to employ inspectors for the state meat inspection program. So that is still sitting in Ways and Means. They have announced the Ways and Means Roadshow dates. So the Ways and Means Committee is a joint committee. So that means there's senators and representatives on that committee, and they deal with everything with a price tag. They are in charge of balancing the state's budgets. And every biennium, the Ways and Means Committee does a roadshow. I actually don't know if they do them in short sessions. We should look that up, but they definitely do them in long sessions. And the roadshow comes to communities around the state and is an opportunity for members of the public to stand up and say, hey, I think this thing deserves funding from the state. So there are 6 dates for roadshow meetings, and FOF will be releasing a budget letter later in the session after the first chamber deadline where we outline everything we think deserves funding. But if you are interested in raising your voice about a specific funding priority, the Ways and Means Roadshow is one of the ways to do that. So they will be in Gresham on this coming Saturday, the 22nd, then next week in Astoria, week after in Warm Springs, then LeGrand. There will be one that's hosted in Salem, but it's statewide virtual testimony is really what's going on there, and that's on the 16th of April. And then they'll round it out with Klamath Falls toward the end of April. So I will say what I know about these events is that they are extremely popular. So if you are looking to highlight a budget priority at one of these events, I would recommend signing up early and arriving early also, and understand that you may not be able to speak because the sheer volume of folks, this is not just for ag, this is for healthcare, human services, housing, environmental concerns, conservation, everything. Labor and industry, all of it. It's just anything that requires money. So as you can imagine, education, it's a big event. So if that is something that appeals to you, hey, raise your voice. We are happy to help you do that. But we will be releasing a budget letter later this session to talk about our budget priorities more. But that is the next thing coming up in the Ways and Means world, where our state meat inspection bill is living. Okay, so now to talk about small farm water access. So we are continuing our campaign to allow limited commercial gardening from domestic exempt wells in line with the current exemptions. We have been assured by our champion in the House. We've been working with co-chair Owens of the House Ag Committee, and he is drafting a solution for us. We do not have the text in writing. So, but we are pleased with the direction that we are seeing it go in. And we have been promised, oops, there's a typo there, have been promised an amendment soon, because as noted here, this vehicle is HB 3372, which is currently a placeholder bill that just says to study domestic exempt wells. But we are anticipating an amendment soon because we have been promised a hearing and possible work session on the calendar before the first chamber deadline. So I want to say thank you to everyone on the call who attended our rally day. We can credit our activism there when we brought 82 folks to the Capitol, met with 42 legislators, and told them how important this is to provide an entry point into commercial gardening that could turn into farming, and just provide an entry point for folks without the means to access high quality farmland with water rights right away. We need more farmers in our state, not less. So this is a step in the right direction that we'll be able to have a hearing on this issue. So look out for more info as soon as we have that language. Our bill sponsor has said that he's waiting to receive it back from the Legislative Council. The way that it works is that the bill sponsor, a legislator, will send the concept, so outlining what they want to happen, to the Legislative Council, which is a office of lawyers at the Capitol, who then figure out where in statute these changes need to be made, draft up the language that is legally compliant, and then send that back to the legislative sponsor, who then can file it and put it on the public record. So we're waiting to get that text back from the lawyers right now. All right. So more to come there, and we'll talk about the anticipated timeline for the water issue when we get to the section at the end here, for where we are in the session and what's going on. All right. So last week, there were 3 hearings that we paid attention to. HB 2548, the Agricultural Workforce Labor Standards Board. I am sure that folks heard all about this and saw the article in the Capitol Press, where we were supportive of this bill, and I'll get into some reasons why in a moment. But the majority of the agricultural community who came out to there were a lot of farm workers present who also told their stories really in a compelling way and told everyone why these labor standards are very necessary. And then there were also a lot of farm employers in the room who have a different opinion on that piece of legislation and whether or not it is necessary or helpful. So then we also saw SB 5526, which is the Oregon Department of Human Services budget bill. And the reason that we took notice of that is because there is a line item in that budget to continue funding Double Up Food Bucks, which is the SNAP matching program for farmers markets, farm stands, CSAs, and grocery stores. And Double Up Food Bucks is a wonderful program that our community directly benefits from, and folks doing direct-to-consumer sales. And, you know, they're going into some grocery stores as well. But to make local fresh fruits and vegetables, locally produced fresh fruits and vegetables more accessible to folks with SNAP benefits, we see the benefits tenfold of that program and are very supportive of it continuing. So that was in the Department of Human Services budget this past week that had a hearing. And then there was also a hearing for SB 108, which extends the crop donation tax credit. So the tax credit that allows folks to write off donations to food banks and mutual aid services and things like that. So you can donate crop that you are not selling and receive tax benefits for that. That's a program that we are very interested in seeing continue. So that has a sunset on it. It's just extending the sunset of the existing program. So given that there was an article referencing our stance on the Farm Worker Labor Standards Board in the Capitol Press today, I wanted to just briefly touch on what that bill means and why FOF has the stance that it does. All right, so there is a -2 amendment that was discussed during the hearing, and it creates what this bill does is it creates a board with 11 members. Equal representation of farm workers and employers and representatives from relevant agencies make up those 11 members. So there are 2 members who are required to be either farm employers or farm owners. So that's a total of 4. And then both of those groups also have a representative. And that traditionally, or what was discussed in the work group, because we were also part of the work group previous to the hearing, we were part of the work group that was brought together by the legislature to discuss this and talk about whether or not this was a good idea before bringing the hearing forward. So in the work group, those representatives were not, you know, litigation attorneys. They were supposed to be representatives of membership organizations representing either farm workers or farm employers. So in theory, that would mean more voices in the room from the direct community, and that was my understanding of it going into it. Then there are also representatives from relevant state agencies to make sure that any recommendations from the board are not duplicative of current standards or statute and are in compliance with legal structures and frameworks, so we're not doing anything that would then make the department vulnerable to being sued over and over and over again, or that are not at first appearing to be that. Then things that this bill talks about that were discussed heavily in the hearing was that this board would have the authority to raise the minimum wage standard for domestic farm workers to be equal to the temporary visa workers, namely H-2A. There are other programs, but H-2A is the most prominent minimum wages associated with those types of contracts. There also is something in the bill that would establish, well, it'll give this board the authority to establish just cause termination in agriculture. This is something that's already required for H-2A workers and is also present in many other industries, namely government employees and famously industries that allow collective bargaining often have just cause termination already. We are an at-will state here in Oregon, so if you don't have a collective bargaining agreement that requires it, or you're not a government employee, then you are most likely an at-will employee here in Oregon. So, given that just cause was a large topic of conversation, I did want to go over the exemptions to just cause that are listed in the bill just to put it out. This doesn't mean that you would never be able to terminate an ineffective employee. It means that you have to document progressive discipline before terminating an employee. And the board also has training and enforcement standards that they're supposed to develop that would inform this. And again, another reminder that farmers who use H-2A visa workers already have to do this. So this isn't something that would start from scratch. There are already models out there that folks can draw from. This is about protecting workers from retaliatory firings, not preventing people from being able to fire workers who are not doing their job effectively. There are also exemptions to just cause, and you would not have to prove cause for letting a farm worker go if the layoffs are for like actual economic reasons. So if you do not have the money to pay your folks, we're not saying that you have to go into debt to pay them. Layoffs are an acceptable reason to fire someone without cause. Seasonal or temporary employment period ends. So most farm work in the state, I know we talk a lot about how farmers strive to provide year-round employment, but that is very difficult. And often lots and lots of farm workers are seasonal employees, and they know that. They're here to pick a specific crop. And once that crop is done, that worker's seasonal or temporary employment period has ended, and you don't have to go through the just cause process in order to let that person go. Also, egregious misconduct, including illegal activity or causing danger to others, is not subject to just cause. So if somebody is doing something that is against the law or endangering others or posing a risk to others' safety, you would not have to wait on just cause to terminate that employee. Those are the exemptions listed in the bill for exemptions to just cause. There's also a section on training and enforcement. So this Farm Worker Standards Board would require training standards to be met and established by the board. And what we mean by training is not training on the actual tasks of doing agricultural work. We're not doing production training here. It is more workforce standards training, as in like, what are your rights as an employee? How do you make a complaint? What to do if you think that illegal things are happening? Because something that came up a lot during this process is that we already have laws against retaliation. We already have laws against worker abuse. We have these laws in place, but we also have really high complaint volumes and a farm worker community who is telling us that these laws are not being followed. And so how do we pair not just new regulations from this board, but also helping a community who is telling us that this is not being applied correctly? How do we help them be able to enact their rights as workers and have more accountability in the system for existing laws. And so that workforce training is part of that, to make sure that it's given in a language relevant to the folks who are receiving it, and also that it's required for all workers around the state as part of an onboarding process. And setting those training standards is part of this workforce labor standards board's purview. Also, this board would have enforcement and investigative authority for standards that they've adopted. So that means that folks would not have to go through the already overburdened current complaint processes, that this board could take action to to investigate and hear cases around violations of the standards that they adopt, which provides another enforcement standard for not only the things that they are putting forward, but when they adopt a standard that is in line with current law, it could also help with that. All right, so why is FOF supportive of this? Farm workers are a crucial part of our sector who provide valuable and skilled labor and who deserve dignity, security, and respect. We know that the farmers in our network are doing everything in their power to be good employers. And what we heard in the hearing was a lot of, if I'm not a good employer, I won't have employees. And while that overall is a logical assumption, we cannot deny that there are really serious and well-documented cases of abuse in our sector. And I think everyone in the farm community and in the agricultural sector should take that really seriously. And if we are not a good sector to work for, how are we going to attract that skilled and valuable labor to help everyone be able to meet the needs of feeding the population? We are of the belief that labor shortages can be alleviated in the long term by making farm work more attractive. And higher labor standards are a way to do that. We've seen that success with other labor standards boards, and improving working conditions can help retain and attract new employees. California and Washington already have higher statewide minimum wages for farm workers. They're only in the Portland metro area is Oregon's state minimum wage higher than California and Washington. And so we are not as attractive for farm workers who have the ability to choose California, Washington, or Oregon. It is true. We are not paying as much as our neighboring states. And farmers who employ H-2A and other visa workers already comply with these standards. So this is not untread ground for the community at large. So there are models to look to here. So that is an overview of HB 2548. The hearing concluded there is not a work session scheduled for this bill. I've not seen any additional amendments come through. We would be open to some of the things in this bill changing. And if they do, we are happy to issue new analysis and talk more about what's going on here. But in general, we await next steps, I guess. And we are very much open to and encourage folks to contact us directly if you have questions or concerns or would like to talk about this issue further. We are part of a wide coalition on this. We are not spearheading this effort, but I do think that it's very important that, we don't represent every farmer, and we haven't heard from every single farmer in the state on this issue. So if you would like to talk to us about it, please do. Brittany will put my email in the chat at the end of this meeting. And yeah. All right, hearings this week. So we had an informational hearing on farm stand changes that were discussed in the agritourism working group that if you've been following this space, you've heard about the agritourism working group. FOF was an invited participant. It conducted 4 meetings throughout February and the beginning of March. It has concluded, and this morning at 8 a.m., I went to Salem to talk about our conclusions from that working group. The farm stand changes bill 3133 is not moving forward, but DLCD, the Department of Land Conservation, the department at the state that deals with land use planning. I'm sorry that I can't remember the exact acronym of DLCD at this moment, but they announced that they are initiating a rulemaking process on this concept, the statutes dealing with farm stands. They will initiate that at their meeting on Thursday, and then there will be a rule advisory committee which FOF will apply to further these discussions, because the conclusion that came out of the working group is that statutory change is not necessary in all of these cases, and that a lot of this could be done through rulemaking. So there will be changes coming. We are interested in being a part of that conversation and look forward to having more to say when that rulemaking advisory committee is convened and we have a better idea of the scope. But in general, farm stands are a specific type of like retail space or selling of farm products that is allowed on, I believe it's allowed on EFU, farm and forest, rural residential, and rural industrial land. And you can obtain permits from your county to have a farm stand. And the primary purpose of these farm stands is to sell product that you have raised on your farm. And there are some other things that go into that. We're going to be discussing promotional activities, fee-based promotional activities, and fee-based educational activities out of farm stands, like teaching people how to farm, about your farm, about growing practices, how to use your product, that kind of thing. And then we're also going to be talking about prepared foods, traffic, and cumulative impact mitigation, and all of that kind of fun stuff. So more to come on that, but it will be going through rulemaking, not through statute, which pretty much means that the agency will be opening a new discussion instead of the legislature. And the timeline that I was given was that this rulemaking advisory committee will start meeting in May and meet May, June, and July. They will have draft resolutions or draft rules for people to review in August, and then there will be a public comment period in August and September, and the earliest that changes would be adopted would be September. So look out for more. There's another bill that we are following. I honestly don't have a formal position on this one yet. We are just aware of it and trying to gather some information. So this is part of the Water Caucus's priority package. The Water Caucus is a bipartisan, I don't know if it's bicameral, but I think, well, it's definitely bipartisan caucus of legislators who are concerned about water use and allocation in this state. It is chaired by the co-chairs of the House Agriculture Committee, Representatives Owens and Helm. And this is one of their priority bills. HB 3116 with a -2 amendment has a hearing this week. And OWRD, the Oregon Water Resources Department, essentially this is them, the Water Caucus, allocating resources to OWRD to facilitate their place-based resource planning for water budgets and understanding water use better in the state. Something that is continuously frustrating to water regulators and water users like our farmers is that a lot of the data is speculative around the state of how much water is being used. Folks are not stakeholders in different parts of the water use equation are not being consulted on decisions. There is just a lot of disconnect because there are many, many agencies that deal with water, and a lot of them are not talking to each other. So there is not a unified water budget, so to speak. So this bill would initiate a place-based resource planning process. And it also has some money in there for specific community groups in outerlying parts of the state. I saw a group from Jackson and Josephine County. I saw a group from Harney County, and I saw a group from Northeast Oregon on that list. I don't have them off the top of my head, but yeah, money for local organizations to assist in outlying communities in this place-based water planning strategy. So that is something that we're looking into, and we'll have more information on if relevant. But yeah, so that's what we're following this week. And this should say week of 3/17. I always do this. I put the wrong date. I'm so sorry. This should say the week of March 17th. Okay, so we are almost out of time here, but I just wanted to make a note that we are coming up on the first chamber deadlines. So by the end of this week, on Friday, everything that is going to move forward in the legislature needs to already be on the calendar or have already passed out of its first committee. This is the first major deadline. So March 21st, this Friday, is the scheduling deadline for work sessions, which means And work sessions are committee votes. And you have to have a hearing before you can have a work session. So both a work session or both a public hearing and a work session need to be on the calendar or have been completed by the end of this week. If they're on the calendar and haven't been completed yet, they are subject to this April 9th first chamber deadline. So if this vote is not taken in the first committee by the end of the day, close of business on April 9th, that means that that bill is dead. And that particular bill will not be moving forward in this legislative session. This applies to all topic-based policy committees. There are a couple of committees that are not subject to these rules. Actually, it's rules committees. The Senate and House rules committees, and I believe the Revenue Committee are not subject to this deadline. But all of the other topic-based committees, so like the Energy and Environment Committee, the House Agriculture, Land Use, Natural Resources and Water Committee, the Senate Natural Resources and Wildfire Committee, all of these committees are subject to these deadlines. And so this is really the first barrier where if our bill doesn't get where it needs to be by this deadline, then we could have the ability for us to debate it in the public sphere taken away. So that's why when I talked about the water bill, I said we will know when the hearing is by Friday because we have to. And we have been assured in no uncertain terms by the sponsors of our bill, which are the co-chairs of the House Agriculture, Land Use, Natural Resources, and Water Bill, that we will have a hearing and work session on the calendar by Friday. So that's very exciting. And that means that that's also our only shot. So we will be reaching out with more strategy on how to make the biggest impression with what we've been given on for that hearing after we know the date. So look out for that. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. So